Hi guys, this is The Renaissance by Fils-Aime and Pacini Prophet.
Hi guys, so this is Pacini Prophet reading like the other half of this right now. So if I mess up some of the words, please don't blame me. So the thesis. After the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, which is French for rebirth, is a fervent era of European culture, creative, political, and economic rebirth. The Renaissance encouraged the rediscovery of classic polyphasic literature and art commonly defined as taking place in the 14th century of the 17th century.
We are now moving on to High Renaissance art.
Introduction. The Renaissance artists have mastered all basic procedures of visual illusions, including linear and aerial perspectives and the use of light and shade by the end of the 15th century. The master of these techniques were exercised in amazing ways. The techniques of scientific illusionism paves the way for the classical principles that synthesize high Renaissance art.
Donatello, full name, Donato di Niccolo di Bettobody, born from 1386 to 1466 AD, was an Italian Renaissance artist, best known for his sculptures such as the bronze figure of David, which is located in the Bargello Museum of his origin of Florence. Donatello was instrumental in popularizing the form of classification in which Renaissance artists searched for inspiration for the remaining works of antiquity. The sculptor had a special interest in bringing a sense of perspective to his work. His marble Saint Mark for the Orsa Michele in Florence, the shallow bronze relief panels for both the Baptistery of Siena and the altar of San Antonio Basilica in Padua, and the equestrian statue of Gattamelata in Padua are other works by Donatello that inspired the later artists.
Leonardo da Vinci, born 1452 to 1590 AD, was a high Renaissance Italian polymath who was generally considered one of the greatest painters of all time. The artist Leonardo da Vinci represents both modern technology and the fusion of superior artist and scientific expression. Leonardo da Vinci, a thinker, a poet, an engineer, is an artist whose fantastation is still revived today. Outside the limited number of his finished compositions, the Virgin of the Cliffs, the Last Supper, Saint Anne, and the Mona Lisa were left with great fragments of his paint and sculpture work.
The Italian painter and architect of the High Renaissance, Raphael Sanzio, born from 1483 to 1520 AD, was praised for the perfection and elegance of his paintings and drawings. He forms the typical trinity of the great masters of that time, together with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. His career, first mentioned by Giorgio Vasari, naturally falls into three phases and three styles. His early years in Umbria, then a period of about 4 years from 1504 to 1508, absorbing Florence's artistic practices, followed by his last epic and glorious 12 years in Rome, working for two popes and their close associates. Raphael was extremely productive, and despite his early death at the age of 37, there remains a large body of his work even in the Vatican.
Michelangelo di Lodissimo Ballonerottissimo, that's a hard name, was born 1475 to 1564 AD, was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet during the High Renaissance. Michelangelo is considered one of the Renaissance Greek giants and a scientific contributor to the humanist movement. He was a master of portraying the body with such scientific precision that marvels the appearance that have been during into flesh and bone. His mastery with human emotionality and introspection led to the monastery in reverse. Never before had the physical intrusion and physical realism of his work been represented with such passion. His Tita, David, and Simo Cote have been protected and maintained and continue to attract hundreds of tourists from around the world. His lifetime accomplishment led to decree to the two Divido titled widely contributing to him.
We are now moving on to Renaissance music.
Renaissance music will be music written in Europe during the Renaissance. An agreement among music students of history with striking dispute has been to begin the time around the 1400s with the finish of the Architect time and to close it around the 1600s. With the start of the Rococo time frame in this way, entitling the Melodic Renaissance around the 100 year after the start of the Renaissance, as precede in different controls. As in different expressions, the music of the period was fundamentally impacted by the achieve, advancements in which characteristics the early present day time frame. The essence of humanistic idea, the repercussion of the scholarly and mastery legacy of the ancient Greece and Rome, expanding development and disclosure, the development of business undertaking, the accent of common class, and the present reformation from this.
Josquin de Puy, born from 1450 to 1521 AD, was a Franco-Flemish composer of the Renaissance. He was the most famous European composer between Guillaume and Palestrina, and is usually considered to be the central figure of the Franco-Flemish school. Josquin is widely considered by music scholars to be the first master of the High Renaissance style of polyphonic vocal music that was emerging during his lifetime. Josquin wrote both sacred and secular music, and in all of the significant vocal forms of the age, including masses, motets, chansons, and frottole. During the 16th century, he was praised for both his supreme melodic gift and his use of ingenious technical devices. In modern times, scholars have attempted to ascertain the basic details of his biography and have tried to define the key characteristics of his style to correct misattributions, a task that has proved difficult, as Josquin liked to solve compositional problems in different ways and successive composition. Sometimes he wrote an austere style devoid of ornamentation, and at other times he wrote music requiring considerable virtuosity.
Renaissance dance. During the Renaissance time frame, there was a qualification between nation moves and court moves. Court moves required the artist to be prepared and were regularly for show and amusement, though nation moves could be endeavored by anyone. At court, the proper amusement would regularly be trailed by numerous long sketches of nation moves, which everything presented could everyone could participate. Moves portrayed as nation moves, for example, Chiniratena or Charanzana, stayed famous over an extended sketch over more than 2 centuries. On account of this move, a Renaissance move can be compared to a ball.
We are now moving on to Renaissance philosophy.
Niccolo Machiavelli was born 1469 to 1527 AD, was a representative for a very long time in Italy's Florentine Republic during the Medici family outcast. At the point where the Metelli family got back in control in 1512, Machiavelli was excused and quickly imprisoned. He at the point composed The Prince, a handbook of literature on the Inquisition and prelative self-preservation, moving in expression, cutting and setting up Machiavelli as the father of current position hypnosis. He likewise composed a few sonnets and plays, in spite of the fact that it was the first and dim period for his vocation. Machiavelli's time took away from legislative excuse, allowing him the chance to pursue Rome history and to compose political compositions, most outstanding The Prince. The primitive subject of this short work about moral principles and endears this man's ability for deciding his own fate, contributing to the insane of destiny, which has been pursued as a political way of thinking that one may depend on methods so as setting up and safeguard all-out power.
Dante Alighieri, born from 1265 to 1321 AD, was an Italian Renaissance poet and philosopher. Apart from his vocation as a writer, through which he tried to raise the level of public discourse by educating his countrymen and encouraging them to find happiness through a contemplative life, Dante's engagement with philosophy cannot be studied. He was one of the most learned laymen of his day in Italy, closely acquainted with Aristotelian logic, natural philosophy, classical literature, and theology. Of course, he is most famous for writing the Divine Comedy, but he openly combines and synthesizes metaphysical and theological language in his poetry, as well as his metaphysical treatises and other works, as well as extensive references and allusions to scripture and classical and contemporary poetry.
Conclusion. After the Middle Ages, the Renaissance was a fertile area of European culture, creative, political, and economic rebirth. The Renaissance encouraged the rediscovery of classical village culture, literature, and art, commonly defined as taking place in the 14th century to the 17th century. Major contributors to the art and Renaissance include the likes of Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Others include Giosquad de Fiore, who contributed into theater during the Renaissance, Dante Alcouture, and um, Nicole Micheli, contribute of philosophy during the Renaissance.